Vikir's eyes open, his body adrift upon an endless sea of blood. For a moment, his mind reeled. Just seconds ago, he had been fighting Corso le Baskerville. Fragments of memory clawed their way back, the older warrior's blades swinging with terrifying precision, the crushing force behind every strike, and, finally, the ninth technique shattering his seventh as he faced it head-on. His hand rose weakly, trembling as he replayed the battle in his mind, dissecting each movement. Then realization struck, and his eyes widened in shock. Where was he? Vikir pushed upright, blood splashing faintly as the crimson sea shifted beneath him. His breaths came heavy, ragged. Was he dead? His gaze lifted, scanning the void. The horizon stretched in all directions, endless and suffocating, just blood and darkness. But then, piercing through the emptiness, he saw it. A glowing white door stood in the distance, radiating light so stark it seemed out of place in this nightmare. Silence overtook him. His heart pounded. Fear surged. The brink of death. The words of Corso echoed in his mind. The Death Knight had awakened his eighth technique here, on this very threshold, battling a basilisk with nothing but desperation and the will to survive. Vikir rose to his feet. Each step through the thick red liquid was heavy. As he drew closer to the door, fear gave way to clarity. If this door truly marked death, then the fact he hadn't crossed it meant he wasn't gone yet. He lifted a hand toward the glowing frame. Looking at his hand covered in the bright white light, Vikir was glad that he was still alive. But this place was similar to what the Death Knight said about the 10th Baskerville technique. Something about everything so far being related to fate. Vikir's thoughts spiraled back to the obsidian tower, the basilisk's rotting corpse, the searing agony of Corso's eighth technique tearing through his flesh. He saw again the man's looming figure, hands resting calmly on the hilt of his sword, words echoing like a curse through his mind. If it's you, you can reach the end of the 10th technique, but only by experiencing death itself first through their fight. Now, standing on the surface of the endless sea of blood, Vikir lowered his gaze, his fist clenched tightly. The hollow, distant eyes filled with a sorrow he hadn't allowed himself to acknowledge. Was this what Corso meant? His past surged forth like a wound torn open. The guillotine's blade flashing down, he met the condition for the 9th technique, death, when he was beheaded in his previous life. And by regressing, he came back to life and went through the 10th technique's condition. Memories of his brutal death and former life crashed into him, suffocating, blinding. His jaw locked as fury roared inside him, his teeth grinding so hard it hurt. He was the only one, the sole being in existence twisted into this fate. Chosen, yes, but also cursed, consumed by a rage that clawed at his very soul. His knees buckled, and he collapsed into the sea, blood splashing outward in violent ripples. His scream ripped through the void, raw and merciless, a curse hurled at the very notion of destiny itself. It all felt like mockery, a cruel joke the universe had played at his expense. The glowing door ahead loomed brighter, its eerie radiance cutting across the endless dark. Vikir's breathing steadied, though his chest still heaved. Was this it? Was his death, his struggles, his very existence nothing more than a path carved by fate? As he delved deeper, spectral hands erupted from the sea of blood, their ghostly fingers coiling tight around his body. Vikir's fist clenched. Once, in his battle with the madam, he had sworn never again to live a life controlled by someone else. Yet now, as the hands constricted around his throat, he offered no resistance. Hundreds of grasping arms dragged him into the crimson tide, and he remained silent, seething inwardly as he let them pull him under, his form sinking deeper into the abyss. Delusion whispered at the edges of his mind. The further he descended, the more his past unfurled before him. His war with Madame, the savage clash with Dantalion, who twisted Quilt in the Indulgentia orphanage, Andromalius, who had ensnared his brother Seth le Baskerville, and Cyr, who bound his fiancée, Camus Morgue. His desperate struggle against the 10 elite corps surfaced, each memory tearing at him, devouring his strength until he could scarcely hold on. Doubt hollowed his chest. Was any of it real? Had his battles, his risks, his sacrifices, everything he had bled for, meant nothing? And even if he reached the 10th Baskerville technique, the summit he had chased for a lifetime, would it ever be enough? As the spectral hand tightened around his throat and dragged him deeper into the abyss, Vikir's thoughts turned inward. Would mastering the Baskerville 10th technique finally bring him happiness? It was the summit he had pursued all his life, the very peak of his existence. Yet even now he doubted whether it would be enough. Cane Corso's words echoed relentlessly in his mind. He could not leave the tower until he had faced death, and only then would Cane Corso be freed. If this was true, if he was trapped here with endless time to grasp that technique, what meaning would it hold? What worth was power gained in a prison without end? Then a vision split the darkness. A battlefield sprawled before him, corpses strewn across scorched earth, swords jutting upright like grave markers. The sky bled crimson as the 10 elite corps razed the world he had fought to protect. Amidst the ruin, a glimmer broke through, the faces of his father, his family, the Balak tribe, his companions, and Perry, the orphan girl slain by the elite corps, smiling at him with a haunting warmth. The realization cut deep. If his strength brought only destruction to those he wished to shield, then power alone was meaningless. But if his power was created by his fate, then Vikir will use that fate for their sake, not for this goddamn tower's. Rage flared in his eyes, his teeth bared as his resolve crystallized. Bubbles tore upward through the crimson sea, and with a roar, he shattered the spectral grip that bound him. Vikir burst from the depths, gasping in the open air, defiance blazing in his gaze. This was not his resting place. He announced that his place was with them, his family, his tribe, his friends. He would escape. He would survive. The sea of blood convulsed violently, twisting into a roaring crimson tornado that spiraled around him, its ferocity mirroring the storm within his heart. Slowly, the raging tornado of blood began to shift, its spiraling form condensing until it shaped itself into a sword forged from crimson. From within it, a surge of overwhelming mana radiated outward, shaking the abyss. Vikir extended his hand, seizing the hilt. This was a weapon reserved only for those who had walked the edge of death. The moment his grip tightened, the blade blazed with a fierce, otherworldly light. His eyes hardened with resolve, for he knew what he held, the 8th technique, the key to the door of death itself. Determination coursed through him. There was no more hesitation. It was time to leave this prison behind. With a sharp breath, Vikir raised the sword high, conviction burning in his gaze, then drove it into the glowing door before him. The blade turned like a key within the lock of reality, and an eruption of blinding light tore through the darkness. Meanwhile, back in the tower, Vikir's body lay still within the crater carved by the Death Knight's devastating strike. Blood stained the shattered ground, and his flesh bore countless wounds. He looked lifeless, his spirit extinguished. Nearby, Cane Corso Le Baskerville stood in silence. Disappointment etched into his face. With a weary glance, he muttered to himself that Vikir had been extraordinary, perhaps too extraordinary. Awakening to such power might have been more than he could endure. With that, Cane Corso turned his back, ready to return to his throne, his judgment already sealed. But then the air shifted. Seconds later, a torrent of mana exploded behind him, so intense it warped the very atmosphere. Slowly, he turned. Vikir was on his feet. His body radiated an overwhelming, godlike energy that flooded the tower. Cane Corso's gaze locked onto the aura, and recognition struck him like a blade. It was unmistakable. The 8th technique, the power Vikir had mastered against all odds. He had done what was thought to be impossible. While Cane Corso's focus wavered, Vikir struck. He lunged forward with lightning speed, his eyes blazing as he vanished and reappeared behind the Death Knight, his arm thrust like a crimson spear aimed at his opponent's heart. But before the blow could land, the Death Knight's blade flashed. With a swift draw, he deflected the strike, forcing Vikir to retreat. The clash's impact reverberated through the chamber, driving Cane Corso back several meters. He ground his heels against the bloodstained floor, fury twisting his features. The idea of being pushed back by a mere brat, one who had only just touched the 8th technique, was unbearable. His eyes burned with rage as he glared at Vikir, spitting out words that even if he had attained the 8th technique, he was still incomplete, that his fate was already sealed. But Vikir cut him off. His voice, though ragged from exhaustion, carried unshakable conviction. His fate, he declared, was to acquire the Baskerville 10th technique. That was the fate he accepted. Panting, his chest heaving, he lifted his head and added that for now, survival mattered more. There were things waiting for him outside this tower, duties he had to fulfill, and for that, he could not die here. Confusion flickered across Cane Corso's face, his eyes narrowing at the mention of things to do. The Death Knight's gaze lingered, studying the raw power radiating from Vikir's battered form. This was no mere survival instinct. Something deeper anchored him to life, an unyielding purpose. Yet to Cane Corso, even that was insufficient. His grip on his sword tightened, his voice cold as iron. As long as the tower traps Vikir, escape is impossible. Then came a sound that shattered the moment. Behind Cane Corso, the great door of the tower groaned as it creaked open. Both warriors froze, their heads snapping toward it. Light spilled through the widening gap, sunlight, golden and pure, accompanied by a rush of fresh wind. Their eyes widened, shock written across their faces. Silence fell over Cane Corso. The door had moved of its own accord. Such a thing should have been impossible. Yet here it was, undeniable. Vikir lifted his sword cautiously, wary of a trick, every muscle tense in anticipation of betrayal. But the howling wind carried Cane Corso's low voice across the chamber. It was no trick, no ruse. Perhaps, he admitted bitterly, this was the tower's will. Their fight had reached its destined end. Closing his eyes, Cane Corso gave his judgment. Vikir was to leave. His fate lay beyond these walls. The grave of swords had spoken. One would walk free, the other remained in chains. Freedom for Vikir, eternal imprisonment for himself. A cruel decree, one that left Cane Corso uncertain whether liberation would ever come for him. Vikir's voice shattered the silence, sharp and unwavering, as he asked if Cane Corso wanted him to return one day and end him with the Baskerville 10th technique. The Death Knight's eyes widened, disbelief flickering across his face. But Vikir's gaze burned with unyielding resolve as he made his oath. When he mastered the 10th technique, he would come back, not to destroy, but to free Cane Corso with his own blade. He urged the Death Knight to wait for that day. For a long moment, there was only the howling wind. Then, slowly, a smile curved across Cane Corso's lips. Fate, he murmured, would continue to flow regardless of what came. Yet in that flow, he recognized the weight of Vikir's resolve. And so he accepted it. He would wait. The wind swelled, scattering dust across the chamber, its currents curling around the two warriors. Vikir's eyes narrowed as he asked if Cane Corso had been the one who tore apart the sword scriptures of the lurking ambush. If so, why did he do that? But the Death Knight's form was already breaking apart, dissolving into the rising haze. His fading voice carried through the dust, a final murmur. That, too, was the will of the tower. The mist grew thicker, swallowing walls, floor, and ceiling alike, until the tower itself dissolved into nothingness, leaving the land open and free. Vikir stood rooted to the spot, stunned, struggling to grasp the enormity of what had just passed. A soft sound broke his stillness. The baby madam emerged from hiding and fluttered onto his shoulder, chirping with unrestrained joy. Only then did Vikir glance down and realize he was holding the tree of departed souls. Cane Corso had known. He had always known what Vikir was seeking. A smile tugged at Vikir's lips, proud and resolute. Despite the chaos, despite the cruel turns of fate, the mission of the iron-blooded sword family was complete. The tree of departed souls was now in his grasp.
Thanks for watching the latest part from the voice of Manhwa. Subscribe for more content and don't forget to comment below what you want to see in the future. Like and share for more.